Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Decision Lens MPO applications. Today, we're going to be hearing from organizations across Texas, learning how they've implemented Decision Lens in their MPO, both how they've developed their portfolios in Decision Lens and how they've engaged with their stakeholders to implement it. We have a good mix of people participating today with varying knowledge of Decision Lens, so we're going to try to keep the content accessible to everybody, but we encourage you to ask questions via the chat window. We're going to be monitoring that throughout the webinar. So if you want to dig deeper into some details or ask about some background and context, please use the chat window to ask any questions. Today, we're going to be hearing from 3 different MPOs. We're going to hear from El Paso. We're going to be hearing from Bryan College Station and Lubbock. They're going to be doing some show and tell with Decision Lens. They're going to show us the portfolios that they've created themselves, and we're going to have some time at the end for discussion and follow-up questions. But first, Matt, your account manager, is going to go into a little background on Decision Lens because some of you might be hearing about us for the first time today. So I'm going to turn it off to you, Matt.
All right, great. Thank you, Marco. As Marco mentioned, my name is Matt McDonald. I'm the account manager for TXDOT, and I work with, people both in the TXDOT district offices, headquarters, and then with MPOs in the state of Texas. I wanted to first just show you a quick screen here that shows that we're no stranger to working with departments of transportation and MPOs around the country. This map shows a kind of a quick visual of the 15 plus states that we're working with, helping them with their different transportation planning programs. On top of that, we work with some cities and counties, some MPOs and some mass transit agencies, and that's on top of also some federal agencies that are connected to the transportation industry as well. In terms of resources, again, my picture there is on the right side of the screen. I'm the account manager. I'm the kind of first level of defense in terms of help resources that you should be aware of. My job is mainly around, keeping the health of the account good, and in terms of, being a person that you can reach. I also can help if you're changing the scope or want to look at new areas or interested in, product enhancements. In terms of the delivery or implementation team, we have Marco Trigueros, who, is hosting this webinar today. He's your main point of contact for implementation and solutions, helping with, actually, implementing the product and, implementing the scopes that have been decided upon. And then on top of that, we also have Eric Weiner, who is our Associate Director of Customer Success, and he oversees the delivery team from kind of a higher level in terms of being, another level of expertise. On top of, these few resources too, we also have Decision Lens University, which is an extension of the Decision Lens website that provides resources and videos that's actually customized to TXDOT. If you have any interest in any of the things that I mentioned, feel free to reach out to Marco, myself, or Ibrahima, who's going to speak at the end of the webinar today. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. These are our pictures. I'm here in the middle. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Matt and Eric will be around monitoring the chat window for any questions. So again, we encourage you to enter your questions as they pop up, and we'll have some time to ask our presenters. So without further ado, we can go into our first presentation. We're going to be hearing from the El Paso MPO on the Regional Mobility Plan. We're going to hear from Brian Miskman and Gabriela Lopez. So turning it over to you guys.
Project selection process, which is CMP strategies, national goals. The last two, project system and strategic priority, were additional items that we got off of our project request form. a lot of the information we retrieved was from the entities. Let's see. So what this allowed us to do is it allowed us to take this to the board and give us a better graphical user interface versus just an Excel spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here and get more into the technical on how we gave it ratings and how the output came up. So I'm going to pass it over to Gabriela Lopez.
Hi, good afternoon. So as Brian mentioned, when we presented this to our board to provide a prioritized list of projects for our regional mobility plan, we had to really introduce what decision length was to them. So we basically took them through the steps that we took in order to have the prioritized list of projects. So first we had to, of course, define the criteria. And as Brian mentioned, we did this very oriented to what the MPO needed and how we score projects based off our project selection process. So we have our congested management strategy, our national goals, and then we included, for the reason of the regional mobility plan, the project system and strategic priority, which helped us get more in depth on how regionally significant the projects were and how easy it was to schedule them or how urgent we needed to schedule each project. So it was really easy to brainstorm the criteria that we needed in order to prioritize our projects. We had a bunch of meetings with our management, and it was a lot of going back and forth and really fine-tuning every criteria. And once we had the criteria, we sent out a project request forms to the entities in which all this information was asked to fill out for each project. After we had that, we just compiled it all into an Excel spreadsheet, which you can see on the screen. So we have the project, our project ID number that we identify it with, and then all these cells are all the information that we needed to enter for the criteria. So you can see our national goals there, how our CMP strategies are done, and all the information regarding the project system, if it's on the national highway system, and all the other criteria that we entered on decision list. So once we compiled all the information, we just uploaded the spreadsheet under the portfolio, and we automatically the sensitivity analysis. So as Brian was, this was really easy to present to the board because they could visually see how well the projects were scoring, how sometimes the strongest projects were getting the higher scores because they were really going after completing the national goals and having a CMP strategy attached to them. So it was really easy for board members to understand how the projects were getting higher scores. And as Brian mentioned, a lot of the criteria for our previous project selection process was basically a yes or a no, but we were able to incorporate some of our model data that we have for our congested management segment and also our daily truck traffic that we have from our modeling team and incorporate it here into decision length as part of our own individual data instead of using the already preset TXDOT data that didn't really match our local projects or didn't really have information for our local projects.
So what we did here is we had to enter, so you'll get over 100%, and initially what it'll do is it'll divide it evenly between the however many criteria you have, but we had to go a step further and actually enter it based off of how the Transportation Policy Board approved this. It was, I believe, back in 2014 that our policy board did the CMP strategies and national goals. For the project system, we went ahead and let it divide evenly among that. And the way we presented it to the board is we actually split it up in between two categories because TXDOT projects we found were not going to score well against local government projects because they have more regional significance than some of your local your local street. So we ended up splitting up TXDOT projects and then also so they scored against each other, and then our local governments. Let me get it. Sorry. We did separately. So if you could see on your screen, those were our local, and that's how they compared to each other. So that's basically in a nutshell on the sensitivity analysis.
And it is something that we plan on using for our new MTP once we get that updated and start working on the plan. But this was used only for the purpose of the regional mobility plan. So once we start really using decision lens for our MTP long-range plan, we're going to start incorporating a bit more of the features that decision lens offers, like collecting the criteria directly from the entities and the stakeholders, maybe going over the weights again, and also try to take advantage of the allocate screen, in which you can also do a comparison with the value of the project and how much the project is costing.
So with that, we can open up to questions.
I think Brian and Gabriela thinks that was a great demo. I think we had a glitch in the screen share towards the end.
Okay.
We couldn't see what you were sharing between the differences between the TXDOT and the, I think that
do you see it now?
just goes gray. No, it's going gray.
Oh, okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. I see what
maybe if you share your whole screen instead of just the application, maybe.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so here's the local entities as they scored against each other, and then up here we have the TXDOT projects that only TXDOT ranked against each other, and only local projects ranked against each other. So we split it up that way.
Great. I think that was a great demo, great introduction of I think the goal for a lot of people using Decision Lens is to be able to visualize results and communicate those results to your stakeholders, in this case your board and your committees.
Okay.
I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to enter any questions that they might have for El Paso, if they have any specifics they want to get into. I had one question in the meantime, and I think you talked about how your stakeholders liked being able to clearly see the scores and where the scores are derived from, and how the process was easier to understand. Were there any challenges that you found with this interaction with your stakeholders? Was there anything that you had to overcome?
This time around, not really, because we were kind of in a time crunch. So, with Decision Lens, it was very easy to get the message across, to show how we came up with the concept and how everything was scored. So they were actually. We didn't really get a lot of confusion or pushback on there. So I don't think that maybe in the development of the 2050, because it'll be the second time they see it, maybe they might have more questions regarding it. But this time around, it went relatively smooth.
Yes, especially since the main part of the scoring came from what they had previously approved from the project selection process, down to even the weights that they assigned to each national goal and each congestion management process strategy. I think it was all very transparent in that term. And since it was for the purpose of our regional mobility plan, we were able to fund all the projects that were shown from the local entities. So I think that's also one of the reasons why a lot of questions didn't come up, because there wasn't really, we used the prioritization to know which ones were our number one goal, but we were able to fund them all, so they didn't really have any thing that they were against on the scoring part of it.
Great. Yeah, I think that's one of the best practices you recommend is going with a process that you already have in place, and you're able to bring your weights and the criteria that you already had.
Yeah, exactly.
And add on to it. Great. And it sounds like you already have some improvements in mind for the next prioritization, so that's also good to hear.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and the other thing is we wanted to let the stakeholders know that Decision Lens is just one tool of many tools that we can use to, prioritize projects. That we wanted to let them know that it wasn't a godsend and it's going to solve all of our problems, because there's always still going to be, politics that play into it and, other things. So.
Yeah. Great. We have one more question that from Busan Gakale. Was the data available in PMDIS for off-system projects? How did you incorporate that? So that's a good question. Some context for some of the people that have been to training at TXDOT. We've gone through an additional tool called PMDIS that is able to, with the click of a button, create portfolios in Decision Lens, automatically integrating, pulling data from TXDOT source systems. So it's a lot of work that it saves you, because you can grab data immediately. It's all very automated. However, that system is exclusively for use for, the data available is only for TXDOT on network roads. So for MPOs like El Paso, you're going to have some projects on the TXDOT system and some that are off-system projects. Brian and Gabriela, can you tell us a little bit about how you experienced this with PMGIS?
Sure, absolutely. So, when I went to the couple of Decision Lens trainings, I found right away that initially Decision Lens based just off of PMDIS wouldn't work for us, because a lot of the local governments don't have information in the database that they're pulling from. So what we did is we have a project request form here that we gather the data ourselves, and it gets we put it into a spreadsheet like this and actually uploaded it ourselves into Decision Lens. So this was our kind of database. And what we had to do is we had to verify some of the information that was given to us. We had to verify it off of our own congestion management plan, and to make sure that the information is only as good as what they're giving you. And of course, everybody wants to score high, so we had to validate the information that they were giving us was correct. So this did take quite a long. It took more work than just pulling from PMDIS. But in the end, it was beneficial to the El Paso MPO, because this is what helped us, and not to score the local government projects. Because if that was the case, if we just pull from PMDIS, then TXDOT's going to rank the top every single time, because, like I said, those locals don't have that information inside some of their systems. So that's the way we went around building our own Decision Lens portfolio.
Thanks. That's good information. I think for MPOs, you're going to have your own data sources, your own needs, and Decision Lens is able to take data from PMDIS, but you can also create your own criteria, develop your own metrics that are more useful to you. And that is actually a great segue to our next presenter. Thank you, Gabriela and Brian. That was a great presentation. And now,
thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Bart Benthul from the Bryan College Station MPO. And he's going to talk a little bit more about our his data, the criteria that he came up with, talk a little bit about that that difference between the PMDIS and state-focused data and training that we've gone through, and focus more on what MPOs and what he's done, what MPOs have available and what he's done at his MPO. So, Bart, I'm going to have made you presenter and unmuted you, so I think you can now take control.
Okay, you'll need to walk me through that. I'm not seeing how to share my desktop.
Do you have a share content button at the bottom of your screen. There we go. You got your decision on screen.
Okay, good.
Great.
Actually, our story is not that much different from El Paso. Very early on, our technical advisory committee determined that they wanted highway projects ranked separately from bicycle and pedestrian projects. And the main reason for that is that our MPO has a policy to dedicate 5% of our allocatable Cat 2 funds for bicycle and pedestrian only projects. And so we have an active transportation advisory panel that handles, it's composed of about 50% of it is, bicycle and pedestrian planners from our MPO members, but it's also 50%, I guess, private citizens, people, who are, who actually ride their bikes, as commuters, and are regular recreational bicycle and pedestrian users. And so all of our projects, our bicycle and pedestrian projects and issues run through the advisory panel. And so we've got here two separate portfolios that we used. And the active transportation one was actually completed first. We were, since the criteria were totally different, we were able to work through that a lot faster than with the highway, because I'll talk about it later. With the highway side, we actually spent several months trying to adapt our process to PMDIS. But our bicycle and pedestrian, when we were working through this, we were trying to decide on what kind of criteria we were going to use, and the City of College Station had actually recently completed an update of their bicycle and greenways master plan, and so we asked if they'd share that methodology with us, and it turned out to be pretty much exactly what we were looking for, and so we actually adapted their process into Decision Lens, and a shout out to Vanessa Garza, who works for the City of College Station. She actually did most of this analysis because all of the criteria that you see here were criteria that they used, and so she already had the data on hand, and it was all pretty much a GIS exercise for her. She gathered all the data and then rasterized it, and then did her analysis based on that. And so we were able to get that. She sent it to me in a shape file, and I converted that to an Excel file, and then imported it straight into Decision Lens. And from there, we did the priorities. We did the priorities exercise with our technical, our bicycle and pedestrian committee. I actually, made sure, we're going to have this meeting, in a week, and you need to make sure you have some kind of a smartphone or a smart device because we're going to be doing this exercise. And they showed up, and as soon as we called the meeting to order, I sent the email to them, and they spent about the next 30 minutes doing all the pairwise comparisons and watching it update here on the screen in real time. And so it actually got, and this was true for both our technical advisory committee and our ATAP, it got to the point where they were actually kind of making a race out of it to see, who was completing theirs first, and watching all the criteria here the ratings change in real time. Both of our committees were really impressed with that feature. Once we had that, there's the sensitivity analysis. There we go. And so all of our rankings were based on ratings that we came up with ourselves. Unlike El Paso, we let Decision Lens handle all of that. And with the ATAP, there was very, very little, I guess, scenario testing. They were, I guess, really impressed with how everything worked out, and they were very happy with it. And so they passed it straight on to the Technical Advisory Committee. You know, for incorporation into the MTP. And so now with the, let's see, the highway side, as I said, we, working with TXDOT Bryan District, we tried for months to adapt our process into PMDIS. And we did meet with some limited success. But, you know, as Brian and Gabriella said, PMDIS is a great tool, but it just wasn't the right tool for us because it's geared towards on-system projects. And so since we had a lot of off-system projects, after several months, we just decided that we were going to, you know, do our own sets of criteria and gather our own data, especially after I had shown our Technical Advisory Committee the results from the ATAP, from the bicycle and pedestrian side. And so working with Bryan District, they were able to get into, you know, all of their systems, the DCIS and the pavement management system and the CRIS, and they gathered a lot of the data for us, primarily Lauren Blackman. She did a lot of work for me, gathering some of that data. On my side of it, we pulled a lot of VMT and VHT data from our model on a build versus no build basis. And so while she was off doing her thing, I was off doing 60 plus model runs to get VMT and VHT comparisons. And we entered all of that into a spreadsheet, which we read in, into Decision Lens, and went through the process. Most of our criteria, they're all, I guess, the sliding scale. We didn't really have any of the categorical type criteria. And so we used the range of our values and created a sliding scale. And then again, the Technical Advisory Committee, they went through the pairwise comparison process, and then once we had that, this was in a workshop setting, and we were able to show them the sensitivity analysis that arose out of that. And they did a little bit of tweaking. We also added we came up with a regional prioritization score, which was not reflected within Decision Lens. And so that made some minor changes to how the project list shook out. And we did not use the allocate. They already had once they had the project prioritization in hand, they decided that they were going to do the allocation portion, the financials themselves. And so that's really how our story is. So again, you know, we relied very heavily on our MPO members for some of the data collection, and they were a big help, saved me a lot of time and a lot of effort. So unless there's any questions, that's pretty much where I am.
Thank you, Bart. That's a great summary. So I think anyone that has any questions, please enter them in the chat window. Make sure you send them to everyone, because Matt and Eric will be monitoring that window and anything that comes up. So in the meantime, I did have a couple questions for you, Brian. With all this gathering of data, what was the biggest challenge, like the biggest lift in terms of, it sounds like you gathered a lot of data from a lot of different sources. Was it pretty straightforward and a lot of work, or did you have to get creative? Bart?
Oh, are you talking to me or to Brian?
Yes, Bart, sorry. Bart, like what was the biggest challenge in all this gathering of criterion data?
Let me see. I guess the biggest challenge, well, there were several. First of all, realizing that we weren't getting anywhere trying the PMDIS method. Once we made the decision to put together our own criteria, things started happening pretty quick. We, just like I said, I was PMDIS, for those who don't know, they've developed templates that have, for each project, it has like, the CSJ number, the project limits, a description, and that kind of thing. And so while we were trying to plow through using PMDIS, I was having to do all of this, entering all of this data by hand, especially for the off-system projects, because the way it's supposed to work is you have a CSJ number, and you have the facility and the project limits, and PMDIS automatically connects to the TXDOT databases and reads all of this information in. But it really only, in most cases, only works for on-system projects. And so, it was very time-consuming trying to get the project data entered in by hand. And so once we made the decision to go over to our own criteria, and the partners helped us out with some of the data collection and that kind of thing, it all came together really quick. So
that's great. So I guess like the big obstacle with PMDIS is that it provides a lot of information for on-system routes, and it's hard to match all that information for off-system routes if you have to
Correct.
gather all that data yourself. So you've made a new model with the data that you were able to gather.
Yes.
It looks like you were able to find some good support and get some good data, so that's good.
And I also, I guess I should mention that since this was for our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which was adopted this past December, we tried to stay as close as possible or as true as possible to the performance measures that have been adopted. And so while there are some similarities with the statewide criteria, there's also plenty of differences that suit our needs better.
Great. One last question for you. How does this compare to your previous process? We heard from El Paso, so they went from going from very qualitative yes or no type of criteria to more quantitative and more descriptive type of criteria. Would you say that was a similar process for you, or how does that compare?
Well, at the end of the process, we were all really impressed with how Decision Lens worked compared to previous process. 5 years ago, there's only one or two people still, associated here, including myself, who were here for our 2014 process, which was basically, spreadsheet based, and it largely it was largely based on a congestion score and a safety score, which we developed the methodologies along with our technical advisory committee, and this one it's hard to put into words. It felt a lot better. It felt a lot more streamlined, and it was a lot more open. Everybody was able to understand what was going on once I explained it to them, and showed them how decision lens worked. We never actually showed any of this officially to our policy board. Our policy board chairman sat in on the workshops with the technical advisory committee, and so she was able to see exactly what was going on, and she was able to understand what was going on. But we really just we showed our policy board. We explained that we used this tool, but we never actually pulled it up and showed it to them.
Okay.
So
good to know, and good to hear that it worked out for you. Thanks so much, Bart.
It did, and it will see usage again at our MPO. Everyone was very impressed.
Great, glad to hear it. So our next presenter will be Kylan Francis from the TXDOT Lubbock District. She worked with her MPO to develop her own prioritization portfolio, and today she's going to talk to us about her effort specifically with the priorities collection. We heard a little bit about Bart's effort with the priorities collection, and now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So, Kylan, I'm passing the baton off to you, and you are now off of mute.
Okay. Hi, as you said, I work for the Lubbock District. I'm the director of TP&D, Kylan Francis. So in probably about a year ago, our policy board had asked the advisory board to clean up our 10-year plan, to really just select the projects that we can afford and that kind of thing. And so that led our advisory committee down using our existing process, which was essentially a piece of paper that you filled out for each project that you wanted to submit. And it was very variable on how things were scored. It depended on who the project sponsor was and their personal rating scale. And it was just difficult to feel like there was an even playing field for all the sponsors. And so I suggested the use of decision lens. And so then that led me to being the one to help create our portfolio. We did not do the PMDIS. We didn't even attempt that just because I'd seen on a district level that it was very hard if you were not in a metro area to really score well. So as a smaller district, I saw that it was hard for us to score well statewide. And so I didn't feel that that would be appropriate for our MPO, just because we do have a lot of local projects. So we created our own criteria. And as you can see here, our parents, as we call them, are project impacts, quality of life, project readiness, and FHWA connectivity. And so those were our main criteria. And then we have children underneath to actually divide out what project impacts mean and what quality of life means. And so this is our priorities collection screen. But I'm going to take you to where, how they mentioned they did theirs at their actual meetings and had them collect the priorities. We did not do that. I had a little bit of a pushback on having to learn a new software and that kind of thing. So what I did was I set up WebExes with 3 to 4 members of my policy board, and I did a WebEx and walked them through the process. And so that's what I'm going to show you is kind of how I did that, how I walked them through. So whenever you're selecting priorities, you would put toggle on this collect priorities, and whatever participants you have that would be part of that would get an email, an automated email, showing they had a task. And so if you see up here, this established priorities, this would be what that task would be. So essentially, I would just walk through it and show them and kind of explain the criteria that we went through at the advisory side that we created. So this is essentially, this is how you collect the priorities. So if you do it in your meeting, which I think is an excellent idea, or if you just send them an email and say, please have this done by a certain date. So essentially, these are the parents, and we want the policy boards or your advisory boards comparing the two. So is project readiness, which we explain what we mean by that down here, and then you can also click on it and it'll pop up a summary of what you mean by that. So plan set readiness, utility relocation, right-of-way acquired, environmental clearance. That's what we're talking about when we say project readiness. And so compared to quality of life, which one is more important? Is project readiness moderately more important than quality of life? Is it equal? And you just, essentially, they just go through and pick what's the most important. And it takes you through each one. So that was quality of life. Now it's project readiness against project impacts. So it literally takes you through and you compare each one of the parent criteria to each other. And that's how you get your percentages. And it literally is as simple as moving your clicker and clicking and moving the bar to what you think is most important. And so, like, again, project readiness against FHW connectivity. So all the parents are compared against each other, and all the children are compared against each other. And once you get through and you click what's most important to you, you will go and you'll be done and you can view your results. And that's kind of what was shown on on the first screen on the priorities collection. So essentially, for me, it was 52% here and there, but then you can go and actually look at all of them as a whole, as your whole group, and you go to priorities and collection, and you notice as a whole, and we did our advisory and our policy. So I have separate groups in the portfolio. I labeled them either as advisory or as policy, and I could toggle on whichever one, and I could see, the advisory had a little bit different scoring than the policy, and then all of us averaged together. So this is all averaged together. So you can actually click on this, and you can go in and look at each one. And there's lots of little features down here that you can look through. You can do here where you can find highlights only. It'll just show you the ones that there's issues. Like there's an outlier here. There's some low agreement between quality of life and project impact. It also shows you if there's any comments or highlights. That's what that is, highlights. And then you can do just the low agreement ones. So you can actually go in and during your meeting, if you want to show it to your policy or your advisory, you can just find the ones that look a little weird that maybe you need to look at again. And then you can look and see who voted what. And, well, there's a big difference between this one and this one. So that's a discussion you can have in your meeting to where you can say, okay, well, maybe somebody didn't understand what we meant by that. Maybe we need to explain better and have a conversation on it. And then you can decide, well, do we really think project readiness is more important than FHWA connectivity? And so you can do that in that group setting and have those conversations. We did it on the advisory side. We looked at it. The policy, we did not. So essentially, what we ended up doing, we showed them the average score, we showed them the advisory scores, and we showed them the policy scores. And they decided to go with closer to the advisory board scores, but then we made whole numbers. So instead of 35%, we went to 40% or 30%. But you can see under each of these parents, project impacts, quality of life, this is what was more important. So for safety, it was more important than traffic volumes, pavement conditions, alternative mode capacity, and roadway preservation. But then you also look, there's children under safety. So widening, continuous lighting, you know, all these, and it shows you how that 9.8% is broken up. And so it's pretty nice. It breaks everything down. You can have very involved, detailed conversations if you want. You can also download it all. You can export it all into spreadsheets to make it easier to have printed documents for your meetings. So I'll show you what we ended up. So if you notice, that was 35%. And I'll show you what we ended up as our final approved percentages for the MPO. And like I said, we rounded to whole numbers. Sorry, take a minute. So this is right here. What's shown right here is all participants. So that's your TAC. Like I said, you could just do the TAC by itself, and you have these percentages. And this is kind of what we showed. We exported this data and showed it to them. I did also take this to our policy and had some conversations, but really we left it mainly in the TAC. Our advisory board was the more detailed. But then here's our custom priorities. So this is what was agreed to at the very end of our process. We decided for 20% project readiness, 30% quality of life, 40% project impacts, and 10% FHWA connectivity. And you can actually go and look. So of that 20%, you know, you get credit for the plan set 30, 20, 35, 15. And this is all based off of the TAC, but they're just rounded to whole numbers to make it easier. But it's interesting, there's lots of detail, and it's just a matter of how detailed you want to get on it. And that's pretty much how our process went. I thought it went very well. You could probably get this accomplished in 6 months, but I would probably plan for 9 months, just because only meeting once a month really limits how much you can get done each month. And it does, you know, we spent multiple advisory meeting months discussing the criteria and changing our rating scale to after we saw some results. It made us go, maybe that's not what we were looking for. We need to adjust that. And so it does take a little bit of back and forth on it, but our policy and advisory has been very happy with the results. And it is just a tool, and that is one thing we focused on a lot. This is not telling the policy board which projects that have to be funded. This is just a tool telling them, based on our criteria that we set up as an MPO, these are the projects that score the highest. But there's always other reasons for selecting a different project over another one. So, and that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you, Kylan. That's great. You can tell that you've had a lot of experience with this priorities collection and training, because you went through that really well. While we wait for any questions for Kylan, I had a couple myself. You mentioned you had a lot of communications with your board members and a lot of back and forth to get them trained up. Was there any pushback? What was their reaction when you showed them what their task was and what decision those looked like?
Well, at the first meeting, when I was showing them decision lens and what you could do with it, they thought it was neat and they liked it, but they were concerned about having to learn a new software. And, you know, me telling them, oh, it's easy, it's not a big deal, it really didn't make them feel better about it. They were just like, you're making us learn something new. And that's why I did the WebExes, is because I walked them through it, and I told them, okay, well, click here, get into Decision Lens, follow me on my WebEx, and click here. And once they got into it and realized how easy it really was, that me saying it's an easy software to use, very user-friendly, they finally believed, like, oh, yeah, you're right, it was super easy. To me, I think the hardest challenge with how busy our policy members are, as being more politicians, was getting them logged in to Decision Lens, because they have to have your email address, and they have to actually go log themselves in, create a password. To me, that was harder, getting them to sit down and do that. So I found, which Marco helped me with this, it was easier if I gave Marco the email addresses and he set up a standard password. So when I was doing these WebExes, they would literally just put in their email address, use the standard password that I had given them, and then they could go change the password right then. And it wasn't another day that they had to do it. So to me, that was the hardest challenge, was getting them to sit down and do it. So I really do like the idea that El Paso used and had it done in the meeting, but you still have to get everybody set up in order to get them logged in. So.
Great, that's a good point. It's interesting how that worked out. The hardest part of using Decision Lens is to get registered.
It really was.
But, I'm glad it all worked out. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think that was good to hear how those interactions went with your stakeholders and how, in the end, everyone was happy with the results. All right, so those were our 3 presentations. I'm going to take the presenter rights back and wait to see if there's any questions for our 3 presenters. Please enter the questions you may have in the chat, and we'll monitor those to ask our presenters. If as we wait for those, if any of our presenters would like to share any tips for any MPOs that might be getting started, anything that you would have liked to have known when you got started, and anything that hasn't been said yet, please chime in, and we can close on some of those best practices. El Paso, we can start with you since you started first. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. No, I mean, off the top of our head, a lot of the things that Lubbock and Bryan College Stations went into, we did the exact same thing. I think, if anything, if you go into this, go with it with an open mind and just be willing to learn. That would be the best advice I can give.
Thanks.
I think it's important to have somebody willing to take it on, because you are, if you're actually putting in your criteria and your ratings, you're building this portfolio, and so it's important to have somebody that is willing to learn it and to stay with it, which I did most of it, but now I'm handing it over to the MPO, and I'm helping train their employee on it, and so it is a process to remember how to do everything that it can do, but it's not hard. It's just a matter of spending some time trying to get the results you want.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that tip. I think all 4 of you showed real expertise using Decision Lens, and I know you haven't been doing it that long, so I'm glad it seemed user-friendly and you're able to get the hang of it. And so for those of you that are interested in starting your own portfolio with Decision Lens, here are some resources that you can tap into. First of all, if you have not registered for Decision Lens, please contact Ibrahima Tembeli at TXDOT, who can share with you the process of getting trained up on Decision Lens. We have a lot of online resources, online courses, videos that you can watch and get sped up on Decision Lens pretty quickly. And then you can access those resources directly from Decision Lens once you are in. We have, like I mentioned, the learning tracks, the courses. We also have support if there's any questions that you have about using the software or any technical issues. You can always email support@decisionlens.com. We have the TXDOT community page that is specific to the TXDOT community. TXDOT and MPOs in Texas have access to this page with resources that we put up, either courses, videos. We can link to this webinar recording that if you want to share with other people that weren't able to make it today, or if you want to look back at something specific, we will put that link up on the TXDOT community page, and that URL is dlu.decisionlens.com/TXDOT. And of course, you can always contact me if you have any questions. I think most of you will have my email address, and Matt and Eric are also around with if you need any support. And with that, I think we can conclude the webinar.